Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, where today we are going to talk about all the books that I did not finish in the month of July. So yes, July was one of those months where I had enough DNFs that it made sense to pull them out of the wrap up and give them their own separate video. I DNF'd 6 books in July, so that's what we're going to be talking about today, starting with the very first book that I DNF'd, which is The Deep by Alma Katsu. Now, this is an adult historical horror book, and we are following our main character who was a nurse on the Titanic when it sank. And she actually managed to survive. And then there's like a dual timeline where she is getting back into nursing and she is on board, I believe it's called the Britannia, basically took the Titanic sister ship, which, if you don't know, also sank. But this is horror, and so there are creepy things going on both of the ships that are just haunting her just a little bit, and the story goes from there. And I DNF'd this at page 51. There was a couple of reasons. First and foremost, I found the sentences, like the writing of the sentences, to not work for me. I found them to be a little bit long, a little bit convoluted, heavy more metaphors, which is great if you're looking for an atmospheric read, which is pretty much never what I'm looking for. So it just didn't work. That part didn't work for me. I didn't care about these main characters, and it was really, really slow paced. So it was one of those weird things where, like, when we were in a scene, we described everything, and so it moved really slow, and then we kind of jumped between scenes, but in a very odd kind of way. And then we would do that again where we described everything quite a bit, and we spent a lot of time in those scenes. And so it was just kind of this oddball mix of, like, very, very slow with what we're getting, but then fast forwarding through everything else, which I just generally didn't appreciate. And then when I went on to Goodreads to kind of read reviews to see if any of these issues would resolve, like, was it worth it to continue on, I found out it's a ghost story, which I'm not into, so I just went ahead and DNF'd it. And then the second book that I DNF'd is The Sound of Stars by The Sound of Stars by Alicia Dow. So this is a young adult science fiction dystopian type novel. We are following our main character of Janelle, and she is living in this future where aliens have taken over and they have banned any kind of creative outlet. So you can't read books, you can't listen to music, you can't make any of these things either. And Janelle is running an illegal library. And so if she's caught, she very literally could be killed. Enter our alien main character of Morris, who catches her, but actually he's okay with it because he's really into music and wants to go on a road trip to try to find more. And the story goes from there. And this is one that I DNF'd very quickly. I DNF'd it after about 30 pages. So it was a prologue plus 2 chapters, one from each of their perspectives, which was enough for me to tell that this was just not going to be a book for me. I didn't like the writing style. It was very, very info dumpy in a way that I really did not appreciate. And the world and the characters that we were building, I could tell were not going to be for me. I just did not appreciate the characters or this world pretty much at all. So I just went ahead and DNF'd it. And then I also DNF'd Kill Creek by Scott Thomas, which is an adult horror novel. And essentially the premise of this is that there is this house that is very old and has, just a ton of history. It's maybe haunted, we don't know, right? And it's been empty for a really long time, and so the local town, I believe, decides to put together this publicity stunt. They're going to open it up and they're going to invite a bunch of horror writers and then open it up and have them stay overnight. And it does not go well, and the story goes from there. And I DNF'd this on page 28. This is another one where I read the prologue and the first 2 chapters. And I will say that I did not like anything about this book. Except maybe the premise, but the execution of it, I liked none of it. The 2 things that I will say about it is that the writing style of this feels very much like somebody who was writing literary fiction who decided to write horror. And I understand that horror, part of what horror does is pokes at, various genre conventions. So I don't know if the author was doing this on purpose to like make a point, or if that's just how they're writing. I didn't want to stick around to find out because I just don't like that style. Additionally, it feels very much like a dude writing characters. It feels like a man who has not thought through their characters writing these characters. And again, this is something that could be very, very intentional, and still I didn't like them. I hated reading them, so I didn't want to stick around to find out. So I just went ahead and DNF'd it. And then probably the most controversial tech DNF that I had this month is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. So this is an adult contemporary romance where we're following our main character of Delilah Green, and she is a struggling artist in New York, specifically for photography, and then her very wealthy stepmother and stepmother like reaches out to her to hire her to be the photographer for Delilah's stepsister's wedding. So Delilah needs this money, so she decides she agrees to it, and she goes back to her hometown, and she hates everything about this because she has a very complicated history with her step family, and like her dad is now dead, and so like her only connection to this step family was like through her dad, and they never quite figured out how to be a family. There's a lot of trauma there, honestly, that they haven't worked through, so she's hating life. But then she notices that her stepsister's best friend Claire is just as hot now as she was in high school, and Claire seems to return Delilah's feelings, and the story goes from there. And I did not like this. This was actually my most disappointing read of the first half of the year because it was hyped up. The premise of this sounds so interesting. And even as I got through like the first 25 pages, I was super into it. Like, I loved the writing style and I loved the setup. Like, the bare bones description of these characters and this premise was really working for me. But by the time I got to page 97, which is where I DNF'd it, I hated these characters. So Claire is a single parent, and I hate how she parents. So part of the thing is that she's got this really weird situation where she got pregnant really young and was with the baby daddy for a little bit, but then he took off and has been kind of floating in and out of her and her daughter's life. And so he's not reliable, he's not trustworthy. And of course, he's back in town, right? And she doesn't really know how to do this. She doesn't know how to protect him. Like, she doesn't know how to protect her daughter from getting hurt. And she doesn't know how to co-parent. And it's completely understandable. Both of these things are very understandable. And how she handles her feelings is terrible. So instead of like being upfront with like ex-boyfriend, when, her daughter goes to stay there overnight, where it's like, hey, we've got an activity in the morning. She is an absolute bear when she does not get enough sleep. Please enforce bedtime at 9:30. Instead of doing that and then just trusting that that's happening, or deciding that this is just not the weekend for the kid to go over there, she instead lets the kid go over there and then moseys on over at 9:30 to say goodnight and then also like enforce bedtime, which I'm just like, that's not what you do. And it like, anyway, so it's that kind of stuff where she just is not dealing with this appropriately, and it's understandable why, but I also hate it. And so there's that. And then Delilah is the worst. So my thing is that I understand when you have this like really complicated relationship with your step family and now you're going to go work for them. There's a lot of feelings. But my thing is like, okay, you're doing this for the money and that's fine. I actually don't have a problem with that. But you have to be honest with yourself that this is going to be a really complicated situation, and you're going to do your best to be professional. And she doesn't do that at all. She does not care about like being polite to her stepmom and her stepsister. And I'm just like sitting here like, this is such a stressful time in their lives, and you are being the worst. This is awful. And so it's just like, you're just making the situation worse for them, which again, I'm just like, be a professional. You don't have to like them. You don't even have to like be like overly friendly or overly kind to them, but you do need to be professional. You're 30 years old. Like, pull it together. Anyway, and I was muddling through until we hit the chapter where we are at an event, a wedding event, like pre-wedding event, and Delilah actively sabotages it. And at that point, I was just like, you're just a jerk, and I don't care. Like, I don't even like how Claire parents, and like, she can do better than you. So like, at that point, I decided it's probably time for me to DNF it. So I did. And then after that, I picked up Warrior of the Wild by Trisha Levenseller. And this is a YA fantasy, Viking-inspired kind of fantasy. And we're following our main character who, I believe, if I'm understanding correctly, like gets banished from her village into like the surrounding wild area, which is actually incredibly dangerous. And the only way that she can like get back into her village's good graces and be allowed back in is if she kills this god. And the story goes from there. I DNF'd this very, very quickly. I made it to page 22. Like, YA fantasy and I don't get along very well, but I was hoping, because it was Viking inspired, that I might be able to get past any issues that come up, but that it was just not to be. Honestly, I didn't really like our main character, and the world building that we were getting was just full of holes, like the kind of thing where I was screenshotting it to send to my friend to be like, what is this? So that's not good. So I went ahead and DNF'd it. And then the last book that I DNF'd in July is Cant, How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation by Anne Helen Peterson. And this is an adult nonfiction, and this is almost like a history in that our author decided to look into why are millennials burning out at such a high rate, so much higher than any other generation has in the past. And what she found was that, well, what the author found was a bunch of factors, and decided that those were probably like the most likely factors, and then looked into where they came from. Why did, for example, the boomers, who were predominantly our parents, were boomers, why did they parent the way that they did? And it's really interesting. This is actually a really interesting book, and it does look at like, or at least that premise is very interesting, and it does look into these factors and where they came from, and positing that this is what's leading to millennial burnout. But I struggled with it, and the reason that I struggled with it was because like a lot of this was nothing new for me. It turns out I actually have like pieced together a lot of this from various things that I've read over the years, and just like observations of my peers and myself. And so it was struggling to hold my interest with that part of it. The writing itself is serviceable, but not terribly engaging. And like, honestly, I made it all the way to page 170, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And like, the other factor, which, you know, I understand what was happening, but like there was a huge emphasis on like work burnout and the factors from work that are going to lead for you to burn out in general. And I know that we do get a chapter on parenting at the very end, but also like, even though the author was very clear in the introduction that like they couldn't cover everything that, you know, is a factor in burnout, it's just basically impossible because of just burnout looks different for, dependent on your race or an ethnicity and your socioeconomic class and like your age. Like your burnout is going to look different, but still, like, it's not just parenting and work. That's not the only reason that people burn out. And so I was kind of struggling with how heavily focused on work burnout we were. And so I just decided to DNF it at page 170. It probably would have ended up being a 3 to 3.5 star read. And this is the one like where I can say, if you're interested in this, and especially if you don't have as much information about it as I do, then this is actually a really good book and I would recommend it. It just really wasn't for me. But that is it. Those are all the books that I DNF'd in the month of July. If you have any thoughts or feelings about any of these books or my reasons for DNFing, please leave me a comment down below. But that is all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.